Isaiah McPeak here, co-founder at Ethos Debate, debate coach by night, and tech entrepreneur by day. And I'm here to share with you some thoughts about whether or not 12-year-olds should debate. This comes up because when we run our camps every year, people ask us a lot of questions about, can my 12-year-old debate or can my 11 or 10-year-old debate? And we have a 14 and up policy, but we waive it all the time. So this video is intended not to be some kind of super dogmatic thing. We can teach 12-year-olds to debate, and they can be taught to debate, but we've chosen to teach at kind of the 15-year-old level and up for several reasons. And I'm going to share some of those with you because they might guide you in how you shape your own child's educational dreams and setting. So I have three major buckets of thoughts here, which are first around, what are the supposed benefits of starting young and some of the counter thoughts to those, and then some of the risks that you face by starting too early in debate, and then finally what I would consider is more of a safe zone here, which is just some prerequisites, because every child develops differently, and you need to be looking at an individualized basis and not to some debate coach telling you what age you should start your child in debate. So to start out with, some of the benefits that people think they'll receive from starting debate at age 12, 13, or at age 12 or 13 are, the first worst one is, getting ahead. Ooh, my child will get ahead and they'll be more likely to win nationals or something like that. And that means they'll get a scholarship and money. And, aside from the motivational critique there about getting ahead versus doing well, I think the 12-year-olds and 13-year-olds that start debate in my 10 years of coaching, I've seen it doesn't really help in terms of getting ahead. We've coached multiple national champions who started at age 15 or even 16 and won nationals just a couple years later, because debate isn't complex in the sense that you have to spend so much time doing it, like say learning soccer or swordsmanship or martial arts. Rhetoric is the subjectless subject. It's the crowning pinnacle of an education. And so rhetoric uses things that you've learned elsewhere. And debate, yes, it does require learning some terms in a new language, but it doesn't require 5 years of that to be better. And the more terms and language of debate you know, the better. Actually, to succeed, it's more general knowledge and more contextual knowledge and seeing the world as your audience does that helps you. If you're talking about jobs in the economy and have never even seen a tax return before, which you haven't probably if you're age 12, but you probably have if you're age 17 or 18, is going to change how you think about bureaucracy and tax policy. If you have never really studied world history, then it's going to be pretty problematic for you to discuss a foreign policy topic that involves, say, African nations or Middle Eastern nations and is forcing you just for the first time to really delve into their history. Not that it's not beneficial to delve into those things because of debate. Of course, it motivates you to do those. But debate at age 12 doesn't really help in a dramatic way. The next one is around mastery. It's really important to master something. And I'm going to save those thoughts to the end because I think there's a huge opportunity cost here that's missed, which is there are other things to master than debate. What about confidence, though? I recommend that speech or, just general public speaking or something that doesn't involve an hour and 15 minutes of defending a position against someone who has to argue against you, and then you have to argue back against them. They have to argue against you, you have to argue against them. That multiple response thing is incredibly difficult, but you can learn the basics of confident speaking just through, first of all, starting with platform speeches, maybe some interpretive speeches like persuasive speaking or something like that, and then moving into some of the limited prep events, such as impromptu or extemporaneous speaking. Those can give you that same confidence that you need without the mental barrage of someone else fighting you for an hour and 15 minutes. That's a different story. What about public speaking then? I think the same thing applies. Students should be learning figures of speech and all kinds of ways. I can't tell you how many debaters I coach that are even 17 and have been debating for 4 or 5 years, and we teach them 10 figures of speech like epistrophe, anaphora, antenna-classes, things like that, and they've never even heard of them, but they've been debating for 5 years. Some further delving into of the fundamentals of public speaking would actually help them be a far better debater when it came time to debate. Finally, what about that logical thinking? Thinking well. That critical thinking is a huge part of debate, and shouldn't that be something that a youngster learns? And actually here I think rhetoric is, in the classical education viewpoint, the capstone of an education. There's, or at least at kind of this age level. You've got grammar, which is for the youngsters, that's grammar school. That's where you're learning facts and information and building a context of the world. And then you have logic stage, which is where you start to analyze and really question things and learn about, say, fallacies or critical thinking. All the things that are a backdrop to debate, but you're still not having to synthesize across every subject at once against an opponent. That's kind of the key ingredient that's beyond. And it's great for your logic to take it to the next level of having someone test your logic. But to start with, it's better, I think, to just learn logic and try it out in other events. So I don't think the major benefits of debate that we've just been through are something that you should uniquely be looking to get at the ages of 12 and 13, unless, and there are several unlesses that we'll get to in my prerequisite section, such as just chomping at the bit to do it. And in that case, if there's a drive, I say go ahead. So let's look at some of the risks then, the downsides. And these are not across the board true. Some people that have started at age 11 have turned out to be fantastic as 18-year-olds in debate. And many people, the rule tends to be, in my opinion, not. So let's go through a few of those, and I think maybe you'll see why. The first is what I would call self-serving information habits, which is because the debater is encountering certain information for the first time, like you set out in trade policy, and it's the first time in your life you learn what a tariff is, or you learn what a sanction is because you've never really studied that because you weren't old enough to yet. You start to learn logic stage information, or even grammar stage information, just new information, with a utility lens. Like, can I use this in a debate round? And if I can't, I don't care because it doesn't help me win. And if I can, great, I'm going to learn how to spin it my way. And it's better for us to spend a lot of early time in our lives just learning and finding out how much we don't know before we start trying to only gather information for how it might suit some purpose we know of right then and there. So I don't think that the younger debaters turn into learners with information in the same way that someone who's just kind of been learned to happily learn does when they come into debate and applies those habits to debate. Another risk is being limited to debater land. And that means that there are, every year when a new topic comes out, if you've ever heard the advanced debaters talk, immediately out of their mouths come 15 different case ideas from cases they've heard of before. So when environment policy comes out, someone talks about the environment case that they remember someone running in maritime resources policy. When criminal justice topic comes out, someone remembers about court system cases, and so on. And that's kind of a limited pool of information that's highly diluted. And what we should be encouraging people to do is not to start their ideas in debater land with these knockoff ideas, but to start in the world of ideas and then bring those ideas to debater land. And it just can be really easy when you're young, because you don't know much of anything, to kind of just follow that along, and each time there's a new topic, think not, I'm going to explore so much this year, but instead think, what was that thing that I had last time, or I heard of somebody doing, let me make that, and on we have our 400th cluster munitions case. Another risk is being dependent on scripts, briefs, or other people's ideas. So here's what I mean by it. I think most of you have probably seen, if you've seen a team policy debate round, the person who comes up and is going to just read a brief, and they pull out a piece of paper and they say, all right, here's my next argument. And then they read a pre-written tag, and then they read a pre-written citation and a pre-written quotation. And then when they're done, without any summary, without any analysis, they say, and my next argument is, and then they do it again. They're not really thinking, actually. Not even thinking. They're just reading briefs. And that's a huge dependency that we're always having to free people from, which is why we teach parley at most debate camps. Not because parley in an event is great, but because sometimes people just have to learn to free themselves from their dependency on information. Because an advanced debater or an older debater learns to think of information as something that supports the argument, not as something that is the argument. And that's a huge distinction that we're always having to unmold out of these folks who started as younger debaters. Another part of the dependency, though, was about other people's ideas, and here's what I mean by that. So this last summer, I went to a camp in South Carolina, and it was one where it was intentionally for younger kids. So I'm okay with that. We're not going to teach at the 15-year-old level if everybody is 11 and 12. And they wanted to debate, and that's okay. No judgment there. But the kids had never heard of the three branches of government in a way that made any sense to them. And so we spent the majority of day one literally learning what is in the United States Constitution, not because that's what we intended to do, but because in order to coach, which is what we're there for, we first have to teach so that there's something there to debate about. But then what became just kind of obnoxious was the entire rest of the time when we practiced, the only ideas we even heard discussed were ones that the coaches had provided when teaching about the three branches of government and things that the Constitution does or doesn't say, or the Federalist and Anti-Federalist debates, or just things that modern people think. And so the debaters were solely restricted to the ideas that they had heard from people's mouths 2 days earlier. That's not really that helpful or valuable when you're so dependent on information that you're learning through the activity of debate. Instead, debate should express information that you already have. There's a more serious risk here, which is around doubting your self-worth, and I think this only applies to some, but there are those kids who, they're in tears in camp because their parents signed them up for LD and they're age 12, and we're talking about justice, and we're talking about, big philosophical words that aren't really that big, but are new. And it's extremely hard to not only debate about justice, but if you've never really thought about it before, it's, very difficult to analyze whether justice is better than freedom, which you also haven't really thought about all that much before. What are the different types of freedom? Is individualism or collectivism a better way to look at freedom? Where are the trade-offs and balances? And what societies have made those choices in the past? That's all this information that underlies those words when you and I say words like freedom and free market and justice. There are three prongs of justice, and they are deterrence and punishment and restoration. Just having to learn what all that is takes days when you're at that age, because you can learn what the word means, but you've never thought about a historical event where it's relevant, and so you have to go learn that too, and then you have to contrast it to something else, and it just kind of takes forever, and they get left in the dust because for a 15-year-old or 16-year-old, it doesn't take forever. It's right there, and so they're diving in and leaving these other kids behind, and then they end up crying, and they doubt their self-worth, and there's no need for that because there's no benefit to being there and kind of soaking this up, because you can soak it up from any number of sources without having to be ripped apart by 17-year-olds at tournament after tournament, because most of the leagues restart your level at the beginning of every debate tournament. Other risks. Well, there's burnout during the best years. This has happened to several of the debaters I've coached, where their older siblings were incredibly good kind of national class debaters, and so they got started a lot younger, and then by the time they were 16 or 17, they were so tired of it that they didn't really want to participate at a level of national class excellence. And I think you can get there in 3 years if you're generally well educated, because as we said, debate relies on other things in order to really succeed. A couple more risks really quickly. One is this idea of a ceiling, that you may never make it out of Plato's cave because you're copying what other people are doing and merely surviving in debate round after debate round, and that can be something that is a tendency in especially the young folks, and I'm always going to break people out of. And usually I do that by showing them this graph, something like this, which simply argues that it's really easy to plateau as a debater because you find something that works and you stay in that comfort zone for ages. And a lot of people who start newer never satisfy themselves because at first they feel bad, and then they build this little habit of building themselves up and then trying a risk, learning from it, and continuing to self-challenge, and that never stops. That's like, I'm still learning more about debate after having debated in who knows how many leagues and formats and rounds and coached it for 10 years. That's what we want people to have, is there's no ceiling on learning to think about, communicate, and persuade and care for audiences. Last of all, the opportunity cost. What else could you be doing? I didn't start debate until 15, and that's because my parents said we had to become Eagle Scouts, my brother and I, before we could participate in speech and debate, which motivated us to complete scouting big time because we actually wanted to do speech and debate, having never seen it in our lives, but just the phrase sounded cool. And I think that I see that pretty regularly, which is these debaters who start at age 12, parents almost rely on the heavy expense, travel costs, and club time as education. And debate is education, but it shouldn't kind of be the education from age 12 and up. There's so much to be said for learning to master something that's different than debate, because debate is a mastery of masteries. And so Boy Scouts is a great example, but a musical instrument, dance, jump rope, a language, a particular subject area that's fascinating, plus a trip to Rome. Like, those are all better uses, in my opinion, of the time that a 12 to 14-year-old could be spending on opening their mind and becoming disciplined at something, which they can then transfer that idea of mastery and discipline to debate when they get there and be just fine. Okay, enough on the risks. Let's talk about some prerequisites. What should you look for before starting a debater? And I say that there are probably 4 things. First, basic public speaking skill. It's difficult to have to pick up public speaking while you're also picking up a subject area of whatever the topic is, privacy versus national security, FISA, U.S. versus U.S. District Court, the Supreme Court case law, the Federalist Papers, like all this body of knowledge on privacy versus national security. If you're having to learn how to project and have eye contact and stand straight and outline at the same time, that's just so incredibly challenging, and you can think you're not doing well at debate because of other things that you're actually not yet capable of. So public speaking is, I think, a pretty major prerequisite. You don't need to be a national champion speaker, but you need to be able to walk up to a lectern and not really think, oh my goodness, can I even do this at all? Because that's a prerequisite. Next, eagerness versus readiness. So I think that there are several conditions where I've seen the 12-year-old or 13-year-old start debate and do extremely well, and one is early maturity, obviously. Like, that just happens. I've coached a few people who at age 15 are in quarterfinals at nationals, and at age 17 are off to their first salaried job for $45,000. Okay, that person matured early. That's just a thing. But there's a level of eagerness versus readiness that I think the parents has to balance. If the child is extremely eager at age 12, go for it. Do it. If the child is extremely not eager, don't force them into it until age 14 or 15 when they're ready. They have that basic public speaking and the other prerequisites I'm about to talk about. Readiness is good. Third, responsibility. This, I think, is a little elusive to parents, but you should be thinking of your child as a young adult before they start rhetoric stage learning. Period. That child is making their own decisions and is responsible for things. It's important because you're not going to be able to control the information on the one hand, and exploring research in the world of ideas is what debaters do, and so they need to be kind of ready and responsible with information in the first place. But second of all, because they're recommending to their audiences to make monumentally important decisions, like trade-off of lives in a national security versus privacy debate. I've seen so many 13-year-olds who are parroting words that other people gave them that they don't understand, that have to do with matters of life and death, and they're trying to get an audience, sell an audience on those things. It's irresponsible. You should be looking for, do I trust my young person not as a child anymore, but as a young adult? And if I'm thinking of them that way, and they're able to make their own decisions and make these recommendations, then yeah, flex those wings and make recommendations that matter, and be capable of understanding how you hold yourself to a high standard of not conning audiences into poor ideas, but of selling them on great ones.